older man wakes up in the morning. He pours his coffee and sits at the kitchen table, the same table he sat at for 40 years. The house is quiet. He turns on the television, not because he wants to watch anything in particular, but because the sound makes the house feel less empty. Around noon, he walks to the mailbox, not because he's expecting anything important in the mail, because it's the only reason to step outside. Later that afternoon, he might call one of his children, not because he has anything wrong, not because he needs help, but simply because he wants to hear another human voice. When the call ends, the house goes quiet again. And this happens again the next day, and the next day, and the day after that. If you've ever encountered an older person that lives alone, they like to talk oftentimes because, like this little story, they might not have that opportunity. Their family's too busy. There's so much going on. Their spouse is deceased now, and they're craving that interaction with people. When my older two kids were little, so Abby was in a stroller, so they were, I don't know, like 1 years old and five, 2 and 6. Yeah, they're 4 years apart. Something like that. I'd walk around the neighborhood. We didn't know too many of our neighbors. I was so busy with the kids and everything we were doing. Um, but there was one man who came out of this house and would walk to the mailbox, and we'd chat with him. I could tell he probably had dementia because I've worked in that area and I'd just gotten used to I feel comfortable talking with older people. And of course, he was, interested in the kids and seeing them. And so multiple times we'd pass him and he'd come to the mailbox. And then because of this, I met his daughter, which is the woman that owned and lived in the house. And her dad was staying with them because of his dementia. And she said, "Yeah, he goes to the mailbox every day. He likes to do that." And it was kind of interesting that I made a connection with her because of my interactions with him. In fact, not long after that, her older daughter became a babysitter for us, and then her younger daughter wound up babysitting too because her kids were young teenagers at that time. So just thinking about the connections and people wanting to interact and connect with people, and that kind of feeling of loneliness. Um, my dad would run out the house at times and run to the neighbors, and I know he loved being around people. And I just think about what were some of the reasons, the motivations for that. He loved when the family all got together and we had time together. And I know when COVID happened, it must have been extremely lonely because despite his dementia and Parkinson's, him and my mom lived in a vibrant community. They participated in all kinds of activities and they stopped all of that, as most communities did. And they were in a house. They weren't even in a center, like an independent living center. They lived in a house, a 55 plus community, but COVID shut all that down. And that was very isolating for so many people to just all of a sudden not be able to interact and connect with people. And it had a detrimental effect on a lot of people's physical health and their mental health as well.
Well, hello, this is Don,
And this is Gina with Focused Healthy Family.
and this is podcast number 217. And today we're talking about alone, loneliness, and aging. And, I was did some research on this beforehand, and it really is striking. They're talking about, well, first it starts out by saying being alone is different than being lonely,
Yes.
and how we we don't anticipate what what seniors really are going through when it comes to um well like we read in the story, being in a house and being quiet and wanting somebody to talk to, for the loneliness of it. And I think we also talked about the fact of going into a facility can help some of that.
Yeah, and even people, some people are not real chatty, right? Some older men, some women too, but just wanting to hear human voices, like the story describes, you just having the television on, you walking outside because maybe you'll see a neighbor and just those little connections. Because even for some people who are not real social, they're not real outgoing, they're not the kind of person that's always talking to people, but we often underestimate the value of just some human interaction and human connection. I know a lot of seniors might get friendship trays or Meals on Wheels or some different programs where they deliver meals to people. And I've heard people enjoy that. Maybe they don't like the food that's coming that they're getting free or discounted, but they get to interact with somebody. They get to know the people that are delivering the meals and having just small conversations with people. We don't realize when we're young and we're able to drive and we're able to go, we often, I know with me, I work with people, I want to come home and just not talk to anybody, right? But for seniors who are retired, even if they're still with their spouse, um, if they're not having activities that they do or getting together with other people, um, there can be a real sense of kind of loneliness and isolation.
But they talk about in here, that as the children of these aging parents, we feel like we stay connected because we give them a call once a week or twice a week, you know, and that's great for that very moment. But when that phone, clicks off and they're back home and it's quiet again, it it isn't really the connection they totally want. They want more of a connection with talking with people. And I think as we're busy as children a lot of times, so it's hard for us to do that. So we have to probably find ways to be able to get that connection that they talk about.
And, having, like we've talked about, staying home versus going to facility. And for some people, having people around them can be so beneficial. So they don't feel alone. They can eat meals with other people. They can
Mhm.
just have some interactions with people and how beneficial that can be sometimes because when our brain is not stimulated, we're home alone. Maybe we're able to take care of ourselves and do our own medicine, but we're not participating in activities. We're not challenging our brain with going out places or meeting up with people. Our cognitive state will diminish just like our physical state will. We need to keep our brain active and healthy. Um,
Well, they talk about the different things that happen for as you get into older stage. Your whole thing kind of shrinks. Your a lot of friends pass away. If you're lucky enough to stay, you end up losing a lot of the people around you. Your ability to drive is either minimized or gone altogether. You know, your mobility gets really tough. I know at the age I'm at, getting up and down sometimes can be a little achy. So I can imagine what it can be
yeah,
as you get older.
I mean, I'm 56, you're 67, but we have a 17-year-old and she calls me to come upstairs to talk to her about something. She's like, Mom, I'm like, I'm coming. First, I got to get off the couch and then I got to climb the stairs.
Well, and then they talk about, and this, something we think about retirement and getting out of work, that's good, but it can be detrimental at the same time.
The number of people that I've worked with, and until I retired, after I retired, I got injured, I got hurt, I fell, something happened. Years ago, I worked with a woman who was a waitress and she continued waiting tables till she was like 80. Um, and I want to say it was till after she retired that I don't know what happened, if she got sick or if she fell and broke something, but that she maintained that. But um, for some people, if they don't have hobbies and things, or maybe they retire and they do some partial work in the industry that they're in or something. Didn't you have a client years ago where he had some mild dementia and he owned the business and he would show up in the office even though he wasn't really working there? I'm having a memory, Don, of, and I might be mixing up more than
I'm
one
trying to
a
think.
memory of
You're-
some there's been clients I've worked with where yeah they still go in the office and they stand there and they talk because they were the owner and now their kids are running the business and they feel important, right? They're going even though they're not really contributing much, but I'm still going to work, and especially someone with dementia who thinks they're capable of things that they're not. Just that routine of going there and being in that environment. Um,
Well, I mean, we had way back when I was in the dairy business, working selling dairy. The owner of one of the dairy companies I worked with, he was he was bright, always bright. Came in the office and literally died in his office because he knew he wasn't going to go home. He was going to finish up and stay in this job until he died, and that's exactly what he did. He died at his desk
And was
one
he older
morning.
too? I remember
Yeah,
you telling.
he was in he was I think he was 85 or 86 when he died, you know.
But
And
that
it,
brought him pleasure to keep
yeah,
working.
uh,
And if some people don't have hobbies, and that's why, hobbies are so important, is we need activities we can engage in. And it's so helpful if your hobbies are not all physical or not all mental, because if something happens and you injure an arm, but you don't enjoy reading or you don't enjoy other things that don't require that physical component, then what are you left with?
yeah. Well, and like with him, his intelligence. He kept going the whole time he was doing this. I don't ever remember him having any kind of dementia. Very,
Okay. So
you know,
he was active and
all the way up to
functioning until
till he died. You
till he
know, and
died.
so I don't think there's. I think that's one of the problems with the senior population is we don't engage in their wisdom, even if they retired, find some way to be able to get out the knowledge they have in whatever industry they're
Right.
in
To
and things
really
like that.
honor our seniors
Yeah.
and um to appreciate their long history and the life that they've lived and information that they've shared. In working in senior care, and I get people my age and even older that are caring for their parents, and they get frustrated with them. They see the issues, the problems, but
Mm.
what about the person that they are? What about, with my dad, we had his book my mom had put together with pictures of the different woodworking projects he had done. And so whenever we met a new person, when he went to a new rehab facility, when we had this book and we could show it to the caregivers, and it was like, it had
Got him
pictures of
started. Yeah.
all the things, and he could talk about that even though, with the dementia, but even though he couldn't do those projects anymore, having those pictures, talking about it, you know, if you've got living parents or grandparents, and having your younger generation get involved, and just asking them to share stories about their growing up or the jobs they've held or some different things in their life. We can learn a lot and things we didn't know. And they really enjoy that being able to share that knowledge, that information, even if we don't agree with maybe things they're going to be sharing or whatever. Um, but recognizing them, and the value they have, because when people do begin to develop dementia and have other problems, we I've seen adults, talk down to their parents. Um, and yeah, they might brain, if they have significant dementia, might be functioning like a 5-year-old or whatever. They're still an adult and they know that and they still deserve that respect. And, we talk about this all the time, Don. How we communicate makes such a difference. And I know the work I've done as an occupational therapist, especially if I'm on a memory care unit, I like to know about the person, even with them when I work places just as needed and I'm going to see a therapist person. We're going to do a 40-minute therapy session. I may never see him again, but, tell me where you're from. I always start there because I've lived multiple places. And so, oh, you live in Canton? Well, I lived in Canton too. Or, I can connect with them on different levels from moving around, finding out what they did for a living. Because I realize what I'm seeing is not the whole picture of the person. When I go in their room, seeing what they look like even 10 years ago, sometimes when they were still upright and walking and could do their hair, and now they're in a facility or, they look differently. Their posture's different. They might not walk as well or they're in a wheelchair, knowing there's so much more to that person than what you're seeing there.
Well, and they actually talk about this because as a caregiver, but who has children, the that we tend to focus on, taking them to the doctor, getting their medicine in a good way, making sure they're safe, all that, and which is good, but we sometimes forget the emotional part of it that they need time to be able to converse, to talk, to understand that all that kind of stuff,
And that's where getting other people involved, dealing with caring for an aging loved one, that maybe there's family members who can't help her for whatever reason, but they can call them on the phone and let them talk to them. If you're busy, you're the one involved in doing the medicine and taking them to appointments. It's exhausting, right? So you don't have a lot of time, and so you don't always have that time to just visit and enjoy them. I mean, definitely try to make time when that's what you're getting to do. But looking for other sources, sometimes, friends that you have would be willing to go visit your parent or
Mm,
other connections. When My dad, my dad was in the hospital many times in his past several years of a life and to rehab hospitals. And one of the times my sister, somebody had the idea to set up meals for my mom where you do these things, you go online, you
mhm,
sign up. And we set this up, and one person responded and she said, if I'll pick you up food at Panera or something. Or said, or if you're around, we can go out together. Because my mom didn't really need meals brought to her per se, but she reconnected with someone she hadn't talked to in a while. And she got to go with a friend. She'd been going back and forth to the hospital with my dad, and she got to go meet up with her. I think she might have even, I don't know if she picked her up and drove her, and they went out to eat together and they just had some time to sit and talk. And this was a good friend that she just hadn't had time to talk with in a while because she was so busy caring for my dad and with as many trips to the hospital and all the care he
mhm.
needed at home that it was kind of neat. We set up this food thing and nobody else really responded to it. But that one connection, it's kind of like, okay, so that was beneficial because she got to reconnect with somebody she hadn't talked to in a while. And, we need to look at that person who is that primary caregiver and realize how it's affecting them, especially an older person who's being a caregiver of another older person, the loneliness that they might experience. I know my mom couldn't get out and do all the activities. She had caregivers came in and she made it to some of her groups, but it was a lot less than she was able to do before. She I think went to book club. There were some things she continued, but it was not nearly the amount of activity that she had been doing before. And so, sometimes I'd go there with my dad. I'd take him to his therapy or be there so that she, could go out and do something. Or a couple times her and I met up. The caregiver was with my dad and we got out of the house to go somewhere together. Because you got to think about, you know, an aging person who's maybe alone or widowed or kind of lives far away from family, as well as someone who's caring for someone. They themselves are also aging and could have their own health issues going on. I work with people in their 80s and 90s all the time. So sometimes their children, are 70 plus and they've got their own health issues caring for, occasionally I've had a patient maybe 70, 75 who says something about, their mother. And it could be true now. Like, someone had a 99-year-old living parent and they themselves were in their 70s and dealing with rehab or whatever that was going on at the time. But so looking at that, looking at those people that are, even if maybe your parents live in an independent living community and there's other support and caregivers coming in, but one of your parents kind of looks after the other one, does the medication, does some of these other things, right? That's time consuming and it's draining. And they might not ever say that, and they love to do it and but it is takes a toll.
Yeah.
It does take a toll. And having some support and someone to come sit with them, even if, connecting with them, getting together with people, having those opportunities. Because, yeah, you can be busy, you can taking care of somebody and doing all this stuff, but still feel very lonely. Um,
Well, and what I made a note when I was writing this, and it goes back to what we've talked about is when do you talk about this? When do you because they talk about, one, why seniors don't really talk about loneliness because a lot of times, they have their pride or their fear of being needy with what they're doing. Or the big one is they're worried about their child wanting to put them into a facility right away, or so they'll I'm fine, everything's,
yeah, they
and
think they're going to be stuck in a nursing home and they don't want to do that. So they don't, that's part of the reason sometimes they don't admit to their problems. They don't
yeah.
admit to falling because they're worried. They're afraid of what's going to happen, of not being in control of things and not. having a say in what's happening. And so that might actually be a reason they're not
Hmm.
sharing things.
So that they talk about, things to look at to kind of see if some of this is going on and you don't know about it, uh, like the caregivers might notice that they increase their TV watching, or they repeat the same story multiple times, like the money under the steps that my mom was worried about,
And we
um,
might chalk that up to, oh, they have memory problem, they can't remember what they said. But there could be that underlying, they're craving interaction, and that's what they remember the most to tell people. And so they want, to have that opportunity to talk with people.
I'm trying to get this stupid page turned that I had this written down on.
Okay.
Um, Loss of interest in hobbies, something. Well, your dad was into woodwork and all that. Now he didn't really lose that until much later.
Well, he couldn't do
He
it
couldn't do it.
physically. We
Yeah,
had to take
yeah,
things away from him because he still wanted to operate his power tools, and he had bad vision and bad coordination and safety awareness. And so what they did at one of the places he went to, like an adult daycare center, it was the Montessori based program I know we've talked about before, and they knew he was into woodworking him. So they brought him some wood and said maybe you could sand this. It just made him aggravated. And
because
I
he
think,
could do more. He
well,
could
and he
go.
couldn't
Yeah.
he couldn't express this, but me and my mom, kind of figured out he's not able to do what he used to do. And so, maybe I don't know that it was demoralizing to like sand wood when this man made furniture, but he didn't see a function for it, and it frustrated him because it just reminded him of what he couldn't do. So we do have to keep those things in mind. That, oh, you used to like this, so we'll bring out some wood blocks and you'll like that. Well, not necessarily. If it's reminding them of things that they can no longer do. Um, and it's like my dad loved cards, and it got more difficult for him to play the poker and the games he played
Yeah.
before. And I was like, we'll get Uno. It's color and number based. It's simpler. It's a game he played with us when we were kids, and so we did simpler card games, and he did enjoy that.
Yeah, he could do that for a while.
And so yeah, that was more helpful than just here's a block of wood, let's sand it.
Well, yeah, because they even talk about this, that it may not be about aging, it may be more of attention seeking or wanting more attention to do things that some of this comes up. Because it also talks about, do you talk more about the past than the present moment? Um, so,
And yeah, like if that's what's in their memory and what they have, not everybody is great with people. And as we get older and different things go on, we can have more of an awkwardness around people. And so we have our stories that we pull out and we lean to those stories. And so it becomes sort of an automatic response just because they like to talk and engage with people. So you can sometimes get them talking about something else. You bring up the topic, you share things, and I'm thinking of someone with the community I live in now, and she's a talker. She likes to talk, and she tends to tell me the same stories every single visit. And her memory's not that impaired, but I'm realizing, she likes engaging with people. She likes talking, so she likes to tell me her stories, and I can get her talking about some other avenues sometime to make it more interesting and a variety because it can get like, I know you've told me this 100 times and you get kind of tired of it. And, I'm the therapist and she's the client, so I can tolerate it more, even though, I work with her regularly, but family members can get, annoyed hearing the same thing over and over
mhm.
again. But how can we engage them in different ways to give them that opportunity um, to talk with each other?
Well, one of the things they brought up in here too is when does independence turn into isolation?
Mm,
You know,
mm.
because they talk about mom and dad want to stay at home. They want to be at home as much as possible. But what point does it turn into when they're home and like we talked about that story, same stuff over and over? Is is it better for them to move into a facility or move to a different kind of community that has more interaction and things like that?
And I think that answer is very different for different people.
Yeah.
Some people, as they age, they're kind of happy with the quiet. I, the independent living community I work at, some people used to do a lot of activities, but now they're getting older. They're 85, 90, and they're doing less and they're okay with it. So you have it's you have to kind of watch. Is it affecting how they're functioning, or are they just really happy to stay put a little more and nap a little more and rest a little more? So there's a fine line you have to watch that it's okay to get older and want to sleep in a little later and take naps and not do as many activities. But are they isolating? Are they, depressed and not getting out of bed, therefore getting weaker, higher risk of falling, versus they just want to do a little less, and that's okay.
I know I'm ready to do less. I don't that may haunt me at some point, but
Well, when we have a whole lot going on, right?
yeah.
Yeah, overwhelming in that. And so, yeah, people kind of have earned that right. Um, and that's, yeah, working in therapy and that kind of is so much fun for me because it can be so varied in a variety of things that I do with people. Before I forget, this came up as we were talking about things, and I want to make sure we cover it. Um, so if it's your spouse that you're caring for because of their physical or mental, emotional health issues, there's going to be a loneliness in that person because they're now in the role of caregiver for their spouse. And so that changes the dynamic of that relationship. And I'm speaking a lot on personal experience here. Um, that it feels different. And I know with my mom, my dad progressed so much that it was not, yes, they were still married. They still loved each other. They did things they enjoyed together, but it really can change that dynamic. And now when you're caring for somebody, um, there could be a loneliness there because that person is not at the same capacity that they used to be at. And so it's a big change in the relationship. Um, and I know, like, my mom felt guilty over feeling relieved when my dad passed, but he didn't have good quality of life. He didn't know why he was still alive. She hated to see him suffer like that and not be able to do the things he loved. She lost kind of him a long time ago of who he was. And he could no longer, really do much of anything that he enjoyed. But recognizing that we're always so focused on that person who fell and broke their hip, or, the one with the Parkinson's or the Alzheimer's, but what about the other person caring for them? What about, especially when there's a couple, a relationship, and that person was their partner, and now that's different. Um, and just looking at that person and the loneliness that can happen with them, because I see it a lot. Um, my grandfather had a spot in his lung for years. It developed into lung cancer, which I believe is connected to my uncle, who was one of their youngest children, having ruptured aorta, dissecting aorta that they tried to repair, but he had brain damage. Anyways, so then he was sick with cancer. He wound up dying. And my grandmother, who had been in pretty good physical health, all of a sudden had cancer all through her body. She'd been caring for him and he didn't need a lot of physical help, but just, and then look, seeing her son go downhill with his health. And all of a sudden, there's just cancer everywhere. And she didn't live too much longer. And she was like almost 86, something like that. So, accepting, um, I'm kind of going off on a different topic here, but I've seen that with, one caregiver is so busy taking care of the other one, and then something happens to them and their health, because you don't realize that gradually it's deteriorating on your health, when you're caring. It's just like being a parent, and it takes a lot out of you when you're caring for kids. Well, your kids typically, unless you have, obviously there's special circumstances or things that can happen, but they grow up and they get more independent and need your help in a different way, and it evolves and changes. Whereas, an aging loved one, it's going downhill. And you know, However, it ends they move in somewhere, or, when they die, just the effect it can have on the other partner.
Well, I think what I'd like to do is leave a question for our audience about, well, one, like they taught here, when's the last time you had a real conversation with your parents that isn't about medication, that isn't about going to a doctor, or those different things like that, versus one that just talks about them and their emotions or their whatever they're going through. So what I'd like to do is leave it up to our audience to think about that and leave us some comments on, you know, have you had that conversation and what was it like and how did it go? I don't know if you want to add into any of those that.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is also just taking that time to just chat about old times. Um, when my aunt passed away, my son did most of the driving. We took my parents, me and my son drove down to Georgia. So it was like a 4 hour drive to where the funeral was going to be. But my son drove, my mom sat up front. So I was in the back with my dad. And we talked about jobs he did. And I'd be like, okay, I remember you did this, Dad. And when was that? And he just told me all these old stories because, his long-term memory was really good for a while. And, just telling me stories about when him and mom met and things he did when he was a kid. And it was kind of neat, a neat time to just, I didn't have anything else I could really do. We're sitting in the car together, and I know with my grandfather, Harrison was doing a book club class, and it was a book they were reading around World War II. And so we interviewed, my grandpa, and I had never thought to do that. He was in World War II. He was drafted. He was in until the war was out in 45, and then he got out, and just even questions like, did you go to did you enlist or were you drafted? And I remember him saying, no way, I wasn't enlisting. They drafted me. Like I wasn't signing up for that. And then just his experience with the war and his opinions, because this was a book on Japanese encampments and stuff, and just getting his perspective on it. Even though we didn't agree with some of the things he said, just hearing it and, hearing his side of it and his story. And it was kind of a neat little learning experience for me and my son. And, realizing we don't always take the time to do that. Tell me about what things were like when you were a kid or your first pet or some different things like that. Because, yeah, because sometimes you can't just ask them, how are you feeling? How are your emotions? They don't want to talk about
I'm
that.
fine. Everything's fine. Yeah.
But making connections in other ways with them, tapping into their humanness.
Well, I did that with my grandmother when this is before I was it moved out. I guess I was still in college when she lived with us for a while. And I would do the same. I wouldn't ask just how are you doing or whatever. I'd specify it to a certain thing like, well, and I remember one time she one of my aunts or somebody talked to me about, you don't know that your grandmother was good with a gun, you know. And so I she was sitting down at the table or something, and I sat down. I said, "So I heard you're really good with the gun." And she's like, and she kind of perked up a little bit. She goes, and of course she would never really admit it. She just kind of said, "Well, I could shoot a little bit, you know."
Because
And
she was kind of a quiet woman, right? She
yeah,
wasn't one to
yeah,
talk and tell a long story, but you
no,
made a connection with
but
her.
she, yeah. So she talked a little bit about it. She said, "Yeah, I could, I could shoot. We used to shoot stuff off a fence and things like that, and stuff." Uh, I didn't. I think I said something to her like, I was picturing Annie Oakley or something like that, and she kind of laughed at that. So it is fun to, like I said, to get into what their beliefs are, what their thoughts are, what their feelings are, and get them to open up a little bit. It's kind of fun.
Mhm.
So
So thank you for joining us here at Focused Healthy Family. We're glad you joined us for the podcast. If today's conversation has helped you, please make sure to mention, like, subscribe, and share this podcast with anyone you might think would benefit. If stress, panic, overwhelm become part of your daily routine, consider exploring Don's EFT Discovery Series. Discovery Series. EFT tapping is often described as weird, but it works. Many people start skeptical, but after a few
let's do
sessions,
some tapping on that.
they say, wow, look what EFT did for me. I worked today and then we was on a phone call with an old friend talking about colleges for my daughter. So I'm kind of talked out. Um, for wellness tips, caregiver resources, and more episodes, visit us at focusedhealthyfamily.com and focusedhealthyfamilypodcast.com. You connect with us on social media, Facebook at Focused Healthy Family, Instagram Focused Healthy Family 1, YouTube at Focused Healthy Family. New episodes of our podcasts are released every Thursday, and they're released on YouTube, where you can watch us and our silly hand motions and antics, um, or listen to us anywhere you listen to a podcast. Don is available to speak to organizations, caregiving groups, healthcare teams, and community groups about practicing ways to reduce stress and build resilience in caregiving environments. For information about booking Don to speak at your location, please reach out and schedule a presentation or a workshop. And remember, how you speak to your children and your loved ones today shapes their future and yours.